You are listening to #Breaking the Myth by Psychbigyaan Network Nepal. We are a non-profit organization based out of Nepal that serves to advocate for mental health awareness. Through this podcast, we wish to break certain misconceptions that might surround the idea of mental health and its care, and hope to break some popular myths we often see in media. If you like this episode, share it with your friends or anyone else who might appreciate it. Hello and welcome back to #Breaking the Myth podcast. My name is Ash. I am a psychology graduate who has interests in body image research, language research, and I'm here to be hopefully your number one mental health advocate. So our usual co-host, Kripa Sigdel, she's not here today because unfortunately she is sick. Don't worry, it's not COVID. She's just giving her senses a little bit of rest. It's just like flu season right now, so people get sick. So we do have another very special guest with us today. That is Simoni. Dun, dun, dun. She is our program associate at Psychbigyaan Network Nepal. I know you didn't expect that noise introduction, but it just, happened naturally. So Simoni, do you want to introduce yourself? Tell us what you do for us and, in general in life.
I'm loving your energy here, and since she sounds a little low on levels, but do know that I'm inside, even though I'm mostly not I'm sort of dead inside, I still do feel happiness to be here with you right now. So besides that, hi, my name is Simoni, and I'm usually very anxious about a lot of things. I am too a psychology graduate, and I would like to describe my personality as a research enthusiast and a budding mental health practitioner. And yeah, I'm here today with you to talk about what it is that we're going to talk about.
Okay, so we're here to talk about mental health in South Asian communities. So Simone and I have had many debates on this in the past. Talking about our own experience within our communities, how that has changed from the past, and just kind of our vision for how we see it going into the future with our degrees in psychology or knowledge of psychology. So essentially, where we can really start with is there's still a huge stigma in South Asian communities surrounding mental health. There's a lot of demonization of mental health as well. So a lot of people really do like using the terms crazy and, oh, are you going to be sent to the mental hospital? Small anecdote. I just yesterday I was on a walk with my neighbor's daughter, and she's local to India, and she grew up here, and she was telling me about how she had experiences with anxiety during her exams, and said that it usually went out of her control, and she had to go to the hospital. And she told me how her family even came back at her and was kind of making fun of her, to be like, oh, are you crazy? Do you really need to go to see a psychiatrist? And although she got the help that she needed at the time, it was a little sad for me to see that she was trying to be progressive. She was trying to take care of herself. And, she's from our generation, but she still had this backlash from her siblings and her family members that were so concerned about her just because she had something she had to go to the psychiatrist for, go to the doctor for, which is so insane,
Yeah. And I mean, talking about this stigma towards mental health in our community, I don't think even us as aspiring psychologists or us as professional mental health people, our community is excluded from this either, because I remember when I had initially started college, I really wanted to start therapy. I called my mother. It was the first time I was away from my family, and I'd given her a call about it. I was like, hey, mom, I think I want to go see a therapist. And even though at this point in my life, my mom is one of my biggest support systems and she is incredibly understanding and quite progressive, her initial reaction to me telling her that I want to go to therapy was very negative. She just asked me that, Simoni, are you crazy? And this is coming from a person who was a psychology major too in her college years, and she was speaking to a current psychology major in her first year. So there was a very incongruency in the knowledge that we were acquiring from the books and the education system, but in the practice of our own household. So the stigma is quite there. It's quite apparent and it's quite commonly seen in our community.
Exactly. Like none of us are really kept away from it, whether it is like even in our own families or in our communities with our friends. And I think a large portion of this demonization is definitely done through media. So, like most recently, I remember, and I've discussed this on the podcast before too, the stuff that happened with Deepika Padukone. She's a Bollywood actress. And just other people in popular media. So Bollywood is really, really popular here and within South Asia as well. So people really look up to these celebrities, which I mean, I have my own personal opinions on whether we should even idolize celebrities or not. But you know, the ones that have been vulnerable and open about their mental health are blamed. People start saying that they have issues with drug abuse and that's why they have mental health issues. And actually quite recently, I really want to discuss this too and want to get your insight on it, Simoni. Yesterday, the celebrity Kangna Ranaut, she was bullying someone on Twitter. Mm-hmm. She's a really famous Bollywood actress. She was bullying someone on Twitter, this Dalit activist who was just openly sharing
Priyanka, right?
Priyanka. And she was just openly sharing about her mental health struggles. I mean, I literally do the same. Like, I think all us Gen X, Gen Z people, we are very open about kind of being vulnerable on the internet. And she said a lot of demeaning things, first of all, of course, about her physical appearance, which I don't want to repeat because that's definitely not true. And then second of all, she said that she should like just go do some meditation and like fix her life. And that's just wrong on so many levels about, and it actually does show on so many levels about what people think about people with mental health issues, right? It's like we just don't have our lives together, or like we don't know what's up, or oh, meditation, what a great solution you've given to us. Like go meditate. Yeah.
So I did catch up on the whole thing today morning. I was reading up about it, and I saw that she had retweeted a tweet about self harm, and the retweet was more about how self harm is more common than you think. And as mental health advocates, and as someone who has been doing advocacy for mental health for at least the last 4 to 5 months, it's similar to the post that even I make for even like PNN about talking about how common it is that people commit suicide and how important it is for people to come out and talk about it. And the whole thing about like the whole fight or the e-fight that Kangana Ranaut tried to start just kind of like shows the layered problems of eastern side of mental health. Like I'm not going to sit here and tell you that it was okay for Kangana Ranaut to say all of those things, but I also want to elucidate while we're on this topic, while we're on the topic of mental health on the east and the west. When we're talking about mental health in the East, we also need to see these different layers of caste and class and the hierarchy of like where certain women from certain marginalized community or certain upper caste communities where they fall under. And in this example, Kangana Ranaut, who is an upper caste woman, was trying to bully and make fun of a Dalit woman. And that shows the disbalance, the hierarchy. This is just a very small example that has come to light. But the thing is that almost all women from the Dalit community, they face these kinds of problems through the upper caste women, and that adds to their layer of trauma. It just kind of adds all of that. And to understand that and to even begin a conversation about how to help these women, how to uplift these people, you need to understand about the whole power
Hierarchy.
disbalance that is seen here. Yeah, the hierarchy that's seen here. And if you don't understand this, if you're a person who can't like separate right from wrong, I don't think you're even capable of beginning a conversation about mental health in the East.
And I think just talking about the layers, like some things that do come to mind for me include definitely the oppression of India as a whole, right? Like we've had definitely a very turbulent kind of history. Of course, the British came by, they ruled us for 200 plus years, and there's the trauma that comes with colonization, and which I know from my personal experiences living in Europe that is just not talked about at all. The British are not really taught about all the atrocities they committed all over the world. They're just like, oh yeah, our queen is the best, whatever. No offense to British people, but also take offense if you feel like it. But there's a lot of trauma because you left entire generations of people with a deep lack of access to resources, right? So the only people that were able to really thrive under the British were the elites, the people who were already elite in the existing social hierarchy. So that was usually the upper caste people, the Brahmins, and maybe even the business classes that could get the exposure or get the access to learn English and move up in a society that was already unequal. But for the people, again, in this existing social hierarchy that were oppressed even before the British, like the lower caste or people who were minorities, they continue to be oppressed, right? Their struggles continue to be ignored in this way. So if a light-skinned upper caste, upper class Bollywood actress directly and openly bullying someone on Twitter that is from a marginalized community, it just really shows, the level of misinformation there is about oppression in our society and how differently even it affects a variety of class of individuals. So that when we look at mental health and even challenging mental health in our communities in South Asia, it will look different. Like we might look homogenous. We don't even look homogenous really. But on the outside to the West, we seem homogenous, but there's so many levels and so many ways in which oppression and those kinds of traumas exist within us that the approach to mental health, I think it is even more important, but there needs to be several levels to the way that could be handled. I think I remember, Simoni, you told me that you have some experience with working with marginalized communities here in India, if I remember correctly.
Mm-hmm. Yes, I wouldn't say it was like a direct working experience. Me and a group of my friends, we were trying to formulate a small research on how much general life satisfaction or like even subjective well-being do these communities have. Like our target population was women in specific, but we also did manage to interview some other members of the community. So when we set out for this research project, we'd gone to this small marginalized community in Haryana, and we were talking to these people, and like we were four of us, and we had taken like a bunch of questionnaires with us. It was a standard questionnaire which measures your subjective well-being, and when we were there, we were like translating each question to them. So suppose there was a question like, if you could go back 10 years in your life, is there something that you could change? So we were translating that in Hindi for them, and we were telling it to them to like fill it out. And the thing is, they weren't really understanding the concept of regret, the concept of happiness, the concept of satisfaction. When talking about happiness and something that they would like to change about the future, all of them had a very similar answer, which was that they wanted to do something for the children, but they didn't really have any hopes or any aspirations for themselves. Mm-hmm. So it occurred to me while we were there doing the field study, like this is a very small anecdote that I just shared, and there were like several different cases like this that he kept coming up that day, and by the end of the day, all four of us, we had a deeper realization of how terms like even happiness or sadness, depression, even anxiety, how these are very Western terms, and they don't necessarily apply to an Eastern side of the world, especially literally a rural community in India or a rural community in Nepal in our context per se. So it just showed us a need that just talking about mental health, just spreading the words of psychology, just making people psychologically aware is not enough. We can't just bring concepts from there and try to impose it on people here. There needs to be a certain sense of adaptation or even changing the whole constructs to something that fits. This is something that needs to be done. That was our insight basically from the small project that we tried to conduct.
I think definitely in terms of cultural translation, that definitely needs to exist because I think for us living in our urbanized societies, and I'm definitely part of that bubble, right? I'm part of that urbanized bubble. I have had the opportunities to live and work abroad. And to be quite honest, like I'm only in my early 20s, but like a majority of my life I was shielded from understanding these unequal aspects of my own society. Of course, people like you and me, we're actively trying to find ways in which we have remained complicit in our views of the world, right? And how much of a divide there is that exists economically, education wise, socially, opportunity wise. It's just everything. And I think for me, sometimes, to be completely honest, I wonder with a population so big, it's a question of where do we start. I think definitely holding my heart as somebody who is interested in mental health, I want to help as many people as I can. Starting and doing the work is really what matters, but it's definitely like the different levels in which people are affected. In fact, even definitely want to touch on the LGBTQ community here in India too. From my understanding, from my other South Asian friends, India is actually considered, or even out of South Asia, like my friends from Africa, the continent of Africa, not the country of Africa, have told me that India is kind of looked at as this progressive place where LGBTQ rights matter compared to other places where it's criminal and punishable by death even in some places. So I think people sometimes don't know how much that can coincide with the oppression and how it can have various mental health effects, because even though our laws are somewhat progressive seeming, right? So we recently decriminalized homosexuality. Woo. We are even looking at, I think there's a bill formed for allowing same-sex marriage to happen, which is way more progressive in my opinion than the reality on ground, because I do believe I've read news articles on conversion therapy happening particularly in southern states. I think in the north they just are even more violent in their responses, but definitely in the south, for example, if a woman who is not a minor, right, like these are women, maybe queer women that just want to go live with their partner, that are being supported by local police organizations. So the police, they put in a missing request, even though that person left by will. And then they go retrieve that person and put them into a conversion therapy program or lock them up inside their houses. So it's just a very hostile environment if you don't exist in this. I think, as far as I know, that like elite queer circle of Bombay, which is like, oh yeah, we can be queer here. Like it's just that urban LGBTQ Americanized, idea of LGBTQ rights, but that is just like in no way. I don't even think that's like 1% of what the LGBTQ experience here is in India for everybody else.
I mean, even in Nepal, it's quite similar. I'm not sure if you were like following my story, but a couple of days ago, I think like 2 days ago, there was this really bad incident that happened in Kathmandu itself. There was like a young boy, a young cis-het boy in his 20s, probably, or even younger, was caught calling out this transgender woman named Nikisha. and he was just going on a bike while she was walking on the road, and he was just recording her because he spotted her. She's kind of an internet sensation in Kathmandu, at
Okay.
least a TikTok star, I would say. And he was just recording her on camera, and he was using abusive languages like slang and offensive slangs on her. I do not wish to recreate the language that he was saying. Upon seeing that, it made me feel really bad about the whole situation here. Yes, like things are quite difficult already for the LGBT community in Nepal as well, but for the transgender community, in like the whole spectrum of hierarchy, they just seem to be on the most bottom. And like as I was talking about the layered trauma, add to the trauma like sense here, add the caste there, add the skin color there, add the class there, and then you have so many layers of trauma that you don't even know where to start with that person. And even to be able to help this person, you are not to be an outsider. You, like I, who want to be a mental health practitioner, can definitely not go up to Nikisha, and like if she ever chooses to go for therapy, or if she ever wants to have any counseling sessions, I definitely cannot go up to her and ask her to be my client, or I definitely cannot help her, because I am never going to understand what she is gone through or what she has to go through on a daily basis. I cannot even begin to empathize with her. And that is something our side of the world is neglecting. We just have a very standard workforce for mental health, these specific group of people who are going into the field. I was in an elite institute, I would say elite, because it was prestigious in India. I was studying in Amity. It had people from all over the country. In my entire bachelor, I didn't encounter anyone who came from a marginalized community or came from even someone who was not from a well-to-do family. Everyone in my entire batch came from a very well-to-do family, or at least as far as I know. And that kind of just goes to show what kind of people we're pouring into this workforce, and how that's not going to help everyone like people like you and I wish to help.
That's such an important point that you brought up. Exactly. I don't think I've given too much thought to it, but even when choosing a therapist for myself, I wanted to look for someone, someone who is a woman, obviously someone who is South Asian or brown. Even living abroad, I preferred it to be at least a woman, or at least somebody who's brown, or at least somebody who quite recently I found someone who is even queer friendly in their therapy approaches, and they like kind of I don't want to say advertise it, but they do share that it's a safe space for the queer community as well, which is new to me, and it highlights the importance of the person who is sitting in front of you, for them to be able to validate your experiences is so important, because in some ways you want to have at least the comfort that the person sitting across from you, if you choose to go to therapy, if you choose to seek professional help, that they are able to provide a safe space for you to work out your emotions and work out your troubles. And definitely I think mental health is for everyone, but even more so it's for the basic survival and the basic entity of the human essence. For people who are suffering oppression on so many levels, it's even more important to take care, because that kind of idea, as we are, upper caste, upper class, our place as oppressors, we often don't think about these things, right? That's definitely one huge factor.
If you are to sum it up in a very brief manner, Western approaches are finally understanding the value of intersectionality in their practices. And I'm not even saying that they're applying it into their practices. They're just beginning to understand the importance of it, and that too not everywhere. But in the Eastern side, I feel like we're years behind from it. Like, I don't think that we really understand what intersectionality is. If you were to include intersectionality in mental health approaches, I think we could do far more good, and the real good, the actual good that we aim to do, not just like good for the upper class community. that we are
Exactly.
actually doing.
Yeah, just making it intersectional and informed. And it's hard with a smaller workforce already. I think like there's a very small workforce of psychologists even in the country. And just like many other developing, highly patriarchal societies, there's not a lot of emphasis given to the social sciences, to humanitarian work, and things like that. That's just really not the focus of our society. And given the current administration as well, I think there's a lot of focus on economic benefits and policies, quite mirroring, I would say, what Donald Trump was doing in America, and just kind of promoting economic interests over human lives. And that's just really, in my opinion, not the way a government should be run. Oops. I think that human lives should be at the center of any governance. And I do some writing, some journalism on the side, and I recently did this article on the Prime Minister of New Zealand. And she's honestly so iconic. I mean, amongst others, there's definitely a lot of women leaders in the world, but just to highlight her work and how in tune she is with promoting mental health. Or so, for example, there was I don't know, this was a couple of years ago, but there was, if you remember, there was a shooting in a mosque in New Zealand, and that person live streamed it. The active shooter.
Yeah.
It was a very very traumatic experience for, I'm sure, Muslims across the world, because they're quite often demonized. And there's a whole that's a whole other conversation about Islamophobia. But what this woman did right after was she banned all semi-automatic rifles, like literally within a couple of weeks of this incident happening. She even wore a headscarf and mourned with the families that were affected. And I think that's just such an empathetic approach to leadership. And I'm off tracking a bit from just mental health in South Asia. And I don't mean like the West is some sort of ideal. I don't think even most countries in the West are this progressive, with a female prime minister and somebody who's being so empathetic to minorities and being so inclusive in her leadership. But it matters. It matters who you give power to, right? And especially if we're run by these governments, it's important that, of course, we as people can take action. We have power in organization, and there's definitely bigger systems that are stopping even good humanitarian work.
Well, you just talking about the Prime Minister of New Zealand, it just brought this thought process in my mind right now. And I apologize for going off track as well, but it just kind of like really brought this burning thought into my mind that it's not very fair for us to compare our progress with theirs, and I know like this is not what you were trying to say here, but I'm just like talking about in general, like how people compare a certain country's progress, of like a certain Eastern country's progress to a certain Western country's progress. Like even in context of Nepal, we were under the Rana rule on until the 1950s, and like it's only after the 1950s that there was a certain sense of freedom in like even the most basic things, like people weren't even allowed to go in the country while the Ranas were ruling till the 1950s. This is like like right there. It's not even too long ago. And after that, things started developing, and there was a whole civil war going on in Nepal for 10 years. For 10 whole years, there was a decade of civil war, which caused so much damage, not only property wise or death wise. It caused so much mental damage that is still being measured even till this date. Like even 14 or 12 to 14 years even after the civil war, it's still being measured. And for us, a lot of people try to compare like Nepali government is a very common thing that I see happening in Nepal, but it's not fair. Like I don't think Switzerland was like had to give away parts of its country to a neighboring country just to have its borders safe, just to not have colonizers come and rule into the country. I don't think Switzerland had like I don't know, about like 150 years or something like that. That was about a dark age for the country, where people weren't allowed to get any education, where women were exploited left, right, and center. And like, you need to keep all of these into account when you're talking about mental health, because like there's also this thing called generational trauma. And I feel like, I'm not saying that that side of the world doesn't have trauma or they don't have suffering and pain. I'm sure they do, but our pain and our suffering is quite different from what they have found medication for, or what they have found treatment for, and it's not going to work for us, you know.
Yeah, I definitely agree with you. It's not fair to draw a parallel, or that whole stereotype of like poor developing countries struggling, suffering. Like, that just didn't happen out of nowhere. Like, human civilization has had many waves and, you know, historical events happen, and we happen to be at the end of the world where a lot of events happened recently. Like, when I say recent, within the last 100 to 200 years. Even India, like, we gained independence in 1947, which was pretty recent. It hasn't been even 100 years. It hasn't even been three full generations that are in the workforce. Like, I'm the third generation. My grandfather was alive when the British were here. So it takes time. It takes time to, you know, develop systems, and recognizing the importance of mental health and all of this is so important, because we use our minds to construct these realities. We use our minds to construct the world around us. We need to move beyond just physical health, where we are also still struggling, like just providing healthcare, good, affordable, and sustainable healthcare for everybody. Just something that is a hope and a wish for this part of the world. And I want to say that, you know, progress has happened, at least with our generation. Maybe it will be our generation that changes the narrative a little bit, but that just means, as South Asians, informing ourselves about some of those class differences and some of those intersectionalities that we mentioned, is just by privilege, by factor of privilege. If people like me and Simoni are going to be the one involved in mental health care here, we need to use an informed approach. We need to understand the inequalities. We need to understand people at their base level of what their identities are, and move forward without internal biases and prejudice, which we all have. Just learning about it and informing ourselves is really, I think, what's imperative in our generation. We can continue to blame the generations before us, but they had their own historical factors. Speaking of generational trauma again, for example, with my parents, I feel like I see, because like I said, I'm third generation, and like at the time when my grandfather was alive, like our family wasn't really like financially doing well. So like I see my parents, even today, even though we are practically well off, still live in survival mode. It's just generational things that we carry, lessons that we carry within our traumas, and things that they understood to be important versus things that they understood to be not important at all. So I think we are finally reaching that stage. Not that there's a particular formula to this, but we're finally reaching a stage where we're moving beyond, okay, money is important, physical safety is important, having food on the table is important. But then beyond that, how are we taking care of ourselves? How are we supporting our families? How are we supporting our communities in a way that we are all happy and thriving together? I think those are the big questions we should be moving forward with.
Yeah, I definitely agree with you on this. It's quite important.
Yep. Yeah, so that was our small little discussion on how mental health is seen in South Asia, what are the different factors that can affect it. And we really didn't even begin to cover even more things that are involved in that narrative. But we appreciate you taking the time to listen to us. If you do like this episode, like it, subscribe to us. We have this episode available on SoundCloud, YouTube, and Spotify. We do have an ongoing Facebook and Instagram page too. So if you live in Nepal, we do offer counseling services. We offer research discussions, which are obviously accessible to everybody around the world. So we do a lot to advocate for mental health and a lot of different programs. So if you are interested, our website link is in the bio. And feel free to reach out to us on any of the social medias and let us know if we can be of support.